Hello, everyone. This is Jerry, and I've been looking forward to interviewing this guest for a very long time, and I'm really excited. This is Professor Ayse. I met her when I was thinking of the MSFS program at Georgetown University. Great program, but she was one of the most standout professors I met during my time. And not only does she have a PhD, she also went back to school and got a computer science degree. So she's humanities and STEM. It's amazing, so inspiring. So Professor Ayse, welcome.
Thank you, Jerry. It's wonderful to be here.
Thank you so much for joining. And you are Turkish American, right?
Yes, I am Turkish American. I grew up in Turkey.
Wow.
And moved here to do my PhD.
Oh, okay. And what was it like growing up in Turkey, now called Turkey?
Yes, Turkey. It was actually, I grew up in the south of Turkey, and which is a town called Adana. And Adana is where the American Air Base is. And it's the unique town in Turkey, which has its most famous product is Adana kebab. I think you might have heard that as well. And it's a very hot place, very warm in the summer, and people are also very warm there. So I still have some of my very best friends, my childhood friends from Adana, and it was a very fun place to grow up.
When you were going to school, did you study English at all, or was that later?
So I went to a high school that had an education in English. But before that, I was my father was a medical doctor, and he actually did his residency in England. So I went to a elementary school, kindergarten in London. And when I was in high school, I actually was an Rotary exchange student to Australia for a year. So I did have more practice. But our school was a good English-speaking school as well.
Well-traveled, you got to see many cultures, even as a kid. Did that factor into your decision to study international relations?
Yes, actually, my original idea was to be an astrophysicist. That's what I was really, really interested in. I was interested in science, though my math was not very strong. So when I was an exchange student to Australia as a Rotary exchange program, its message was about peace. And that intrigued me. And I learned from different cultures, different histories, and I wanted to represent my country and become a diplomat. And that's why I actually studied international relations. But once I started learning about international relations, I was more interested in understanding the sources of conflicts and how to prevent them. And that led me to do a PhD. And I stayed in the academia rather than going into the diplomatic corps.
I see. Were there any classes, whether in undergrad or master's or in your PhD, that really kind of cemented your path?
I read a book when I was about to decide on a university, my master's program. It was Cosmopolitan Approaches to International Relations by Chris Brown, which introduced me to the field of conflict resolution. And so I actually became very interested. Chris Brown was one of the founders of the Canterbury Canterbury University in Canterbury, Kent, in England, and he had established the conflict resolution, conflict analysis program there. So that made me decide on conflict analysis and conflict resolution to go there. Yeah.
That field continues to evolve, right? And that's what's so exciting about that field.
Yes, I think conflict resolution field in general is a very misunderstood field, and also which is related to peace, peace building. Peace is often assumed to be just like, giving in, always being a sort of a nice, kind, which is a completely misunderstanding of the field. The conflict resolution field really focuses on why is there conflict, but one thing we know is that conflict is a necessary part of life. So not all conflicts are bad. So how do we understand and transform destructive conflicts and find better ways to manage our conflicts without really hurting each other and benefiting everyone? So that's really the idea. And it's not always necessarily a sort of turning the other cheek. It may be appropriate for some conflicts, but we have many different tools in conflict resolution field.
I know in some of the talks you give, you talk about the other side, the non-destructive, the constructive conflicts,
Yes.
right? And I was listening to one of those talks. I was like, I never thought about that, but yeah, like when we think of conflicts, we oftentimes think of the destructive, but you think about whether you have conflict with your friends, sometimes you have conflict with your parents, right? Not all of that's destructive. If anything, it leads to compromise, it leads to more understanding.
Actually, conflict allows us to grow. If you like to write stories, for example, first thing they look, whether your story is good or not, is how good are your conflicts? Does your characters have growth arc, and does the conflicts evolve them into making them a better person? So that's an example of a constructive conflict. Without a conflict, you couldn't even have a story. And it would be interesting. I mean, you could have a story, I guess, but so I think we have to understand that conflict can be a positive and factor, and to help us grow and transform into better versions of ourselves.
You had gone to school in London, you had gone to school in Turkey, you had gone to school in Australia. How is going to school in the US compared to all that?
I think sort of like Turkish school system, especially university. I went to the undergrad in university. One thing that was very different was that everything was much more structured. Like all the courses that you were going to take were already established. Your exam dates, you knew everything. It was regular. And also, we had very big classrooms. So there was less interaction with the faculty, though you could try to seek it out, but it was only so much they could do with 400, 500 students. My master's degree in England was much smaller. So we had a very, like, it was a hybrid version of it. The first part of the master's program, which was 1 year, was you could not choose your courses when you were doing it, but the last semester or quarter, you could actually choose your courses, which gave you some flexibility of what to explore your own interest areas. And it was also much more sort of interactive dynamic with the faculty, and it allowed you to write more papers and think more critically. Coming to the United States was it was a PhD program, but I also can see as an undergrad to have students in this field that you have more options to focus on the areas that you're interested in. Less structured, there's less sort of a determined approach to what courses that you could take, which allows you to grow in areas that you would like to explore more. And also, there is much more interaction with faculty. I love my students. They like to question us all the time, which is great. I mean, I think that's one of the best parts, is that it's a more dynamic class environment right now. So that was really fun. I really enjoyed it. And students, I could compare with some students at Georgetown and at the undergrad. Very, very sort of a curious, devoted students. They are very interested in what they're doing and extremely hardworking.
Yeah.
I was not that hardworking myself when I was an undergrad, I have to admit. So I get inspired by how devoted, how focused, and how creative my students are.
It's funny too, because I look at my undergrad and I was like, man, there are times when I could have worked harder, but I get a feeling, knowing what you know now versus what you were when you were undergrad, I think we all worked very hard.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we worked very hard, but I think I was a very untraditional thinker in many ways. I always like to question and read things outside of my class topics, and I didn't have enough, I think, at the time, sort of a wisdom to link them together. But I realized that all of these different areas and different fields are very interrelated. I think one thing that happened to our society is that we became very laser focused on our own little areas, and we forget the connection between different fields. So I really liked how old generations or ancients start thinking about all, like, music and philosophy and math. They saw this as interconnected. But of course, we're bombarded with larger amounts of data and information. It makes it really hard to maintain that sort of a broader vision when you're exposed to so much information.
Yeah. The thing I always tell people is, like, you think about some of our most celebrated philosophers, like, they weren't just philosophers. They were also historians. They were also physicists. They were also, they were very hyphenated. And I
Absolutely.
think Professor Ayse really agrees with me on this. Like, I think everyone, especially in this day and age when things are so AI driven, everyone has to be hyphenated because the ability slash the access to information is getting easier. The ability to grasp and the access to information is getting easier. So everyone should challenge their brains to become experts at more and more areas.
Yeah, I think what's going to be very important is not to memorization of knowledge, because that's going to be easily accessible, but sort of thinking or becoming more wise. What information is important? How do I use this information? How do I make myself a better version of myself in this kind of world? Because information is just a tool at the end of the day. And when it's so easy to access, how do we discern what is the right information that we need? And what do we do with that information for ourselves and for others? I think we're going to have to think in a new way, maybe hopefully a wiser way.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So we will definitely segue back into this because this is a topic we definitely need to keep discussing. But let's very quickly talk about your PhD dissertation. So was it easy to come up with a topic? Was it a topic that you thought about for a while?
So it was not that easy, but I always was very curious. Sort of like rather than following a standard rule or anything, I always like to follow what I think is the most interesting question at the time. So when I was doing my PhD, I became really interested in the conflict in Israel Palestine at the time. This was in 1997. So one thing that really sort of struck me at the time was the role of religion that was being played. But in 1990s, the conflict resolution field was not really focused on the role of religion as much. Religion, culture was seen as something that belonged to the anthropological field initially. Of course, there were some sort of pioneers like Kevin Arroch and others, but who were like linking those areas, but that was not the mainstream at the time. But to me, without really understanding the cultural, religious dimensions of conflicts, it's really difficult for us to find constructive avenues. So I was interested in sort of trying to understand the role of religion in this conflict and what role. So coming from as being a Muslim, coming from Turkey, I was more familiar with the Islamic sort of interpretations. So I also wanted to understand sort of as a person of religious, sort of as religious people, we all look at the verses in our text, whatever text that you like to see, and everybody comes up with a different interpretation. And they're not only your own interpretation, if you look at the historically different great minds have come up with different interpretations. So I was also very curious to understand what makes people look at a text and interpret this differently. What are some of the factors? So I wanted to sort of look at the how within the context in 1990s among Palestinian communities, religion inspired them, and how did they all interpret their texts to guide them in their response to this conflict. So I realized that there were not only one responses, but there were different responses. There was those who used religion and interpreted the text to fight offensive wars. There were others who wanted to use it for nonviolent. There were very strict laws according to Islamic interpretation of these sort of individuals that had to abide by. And there were also those Muslims who were completely nonviolent, and they believed this was also in the text. So that's when I started looking at this conflict and tried to understand. So I did some field work in the region. And one thing that emerged as important was the sort of Islamic groups were becoming very prominent. This was the time of Camp David Accords. Secular peace building was, becoming very important. And this was the end of like the Oslo process, which was believed to be the success of conflict resolution field and peace building. And but one of the things that we saw was immediately was that religious extremists in both communities derailed this process. And after that, religion started to become an important topic to understand from a conflict resolution field. And 2001, 9/11 also happened, that tragic event, which also made people really rethink the role of religion, and particularly Islam and violent extremism. So because my PhD dissertation, as I was following my findings on the ground, I saw that Islamic groups were becoming more sort of powerful rather than the PLO and other groups at the time, like Hamas and etc. I became more interested in working on religion and peace. But at the same time, one thing that I could see was religion could also be a strong inspiration for peace building, human rights, justice, and finding better solutions. So I wanted to understand. So I always look for those areas that it's neither black nor white. It's neither violent nor non-violent completely. But how do we find the right balance? And how do we create a sort of an environment where religion can inspire? So that led me to work afterwards, after I finished my PhD, to work with a lot of communities, interfaith dialogues from Jewish, Christian, and Muslim communities. I did a lot of religious leader training of trainers. I worked with rabbis, with priests, with imams, working within their own religious traditions to understand how do we sort of how do we inspire people to use their faith to build peace rather than sort of create more conflict. Of course, this became more and more important as we saw religious populism and religious nationalism and ethno-religious conflicts become more and more destructive. And that's where I was working. But because mostly my work was working with religious leaders, and religious leaders were often assumed to be men, most of the time I was working with male religious leaders, which is not true. I mean, there are many Muslim, Christian, and Jewish, and Buddhist, and other Hindu women leaders who religious leaders who also use their faith as a resource. So I became very interested in where are these women faith leaders and what's the kind of peace work that they're doing. So that made me become more and more interested in the role of women. And in peace building, I start writing about Muslim women peace building actors. Found so many women who are doing incredible work, yet their work is not visible because they're not put, there's no spotlight is put on them. And they don't want the spotlight always anyway, because they like to work on the back. So that made me shift my attention from just being in religion and religious actors to like women in faith. But as I was working on women's issues and women peace builders, that made me really think about how culture, religion, and go beyond that, was like how our gender stereotypes, gender assumptions influence these different roles. But then also I realized that focusing on women was also very limited. So I started to expand my understanding of gender is not only about women. Woman is just one of the genders. And so I start working on masculinities, but also what does it mean? I mean, both men and women have different experiences in conflict, but not only that, your different ethnicity, your different age, your religion influences your experiences. And based on these experiences, you have different resources, different issues. So if we want to have more effective peace building and resolve conflicts more effectively, we really need to understand this dynamic. But this is what it makes is like in classical theories, people try to find one silver bullet to answer all problems. But that is really not helpful if you're trying to solve a conflict. You really need to understand multiple points of view, and there's no one answer to all conflicts in the world. So this makes our field very complex, with multiple dimensions. Input-output relationship is not as clear. Causal dynamics are not that clear. So that makes it very challenging. But there's no shortcuts. You cannot really that made me focus more on gender and religion, culture, but also different elements of conflict resolution.
Wow. And that dissertation eventually turned into a book, right?
Yes. It was a very long dissertation, 540 pages. So I shortened it to, I think, less than 300, and it's a book called Standing on an Isthmus: Islamic Narratives of War and Peace in West Bank and Gaza. But I unfortunately, it's a sort of only hard copy, and it's available on Amazon, but it's not very cheap.
I see.
I can't afford it.
There's just so much to talk about in conflict resolution. I mean, first of all, look at where this world is, right? This world seems to need a little conflict resolution. But your point about a lot of times the leaders traditionally, people assume they're male. And it reminded me of, there was a very famous underground Christian in China, and she was a lady. And she wrote some of the most inspiring underground Christian hymns in China. I forgot her name. I was thinking her name. I didn't remember her name. But I was like, that's when I think about leaders that don't fit into that traditional institutional role. That's the one I think about immediately. Like, she even came to the DC area when I was in college, I believe.
Oh, wow.
And she shared sort of some of her experiences. Like, Christian songs just pop into her head based on her experiences in China. I think now she's treated better, because, Christianity has sort of one of these relationships in Chinese society that wavers. But when she first started, I think she wasn't treated as well. But it inspired her to write some of the best Christian songs. I think about that. That's my example to sort of give to you.
Yeah, actually, the very first known author with a name inscribed was, I think, in the Sumerian tradition. She was also writing hymns, and one thing that she did was she put her name as the author of her work. So she's considered the first author in human history, as far as we know. There may be others rediscovered later on, but she was also writing hymns and was a priestess. And there are a lot of firsts that were women, but of course there are a lot of firsts that are men as well. But I think women are often less recorded in history, or history books.
Yeah. When you did your field work in the West Bank and in the Palestinian territories, was that your first time going there, or had you been there? Wow.
Yeah, that was my very first time.
Wow.
But I've been there many times afterwards to Israel and Palestine. But yeah, it was my first time when I did my research.
Yeah, that sounded like, whenever you go to a place for the first time, you're confronting your own stereotypes, you're confronting your own expectations, right?
Yeah, also it was quite interesting because I was hosted by a Jewish family friend of ours from Tel Aviv, and then they took me to Jerusalem to drop me. And then from Jerusalem, I met the family. I was actually staying in a Bible college, in a Christian institution, and I was doing work with the Muslims. So it was a very interesting experience. So it was not just focused on one area. I always like to look at things from multiple points of view.
Knowing where the Arab world is now, and knowing kind of the US and how it's handling foreign relations, what are some common misunderstandings, if you have any in your mind? What can the world know better about whether a specific part of the Arab world or the Arab world in general? And by me asking that question, that might even show some of my assumptions that aren't correct, which is you can't just call it an Arab world, because obviously we got Shia, we got Sunni, there's a lot of things to think about. Maybe lumping it all as the Arab world is already a bad assumption.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of misunderstandings. I think one thing is that, as you said, our world is not a unified. There's religious and other differences. Even the Arabic language has different flavors. If in the West, Maghreb, then Saudi Arabia, then Syria, or Egypt. And so it's a very rich, diverse world. And they have a very long, brilliant history. Some of the best minds of historical wisdom came from the Arab world. For example, another first, I'm going to connect it to women again, but the oldest, longest running university in the world, in the Guinness records, older than Cambridge and others, is founded by an Arab Muslim woman in Morocco, Fez Al-Qarawiyyin University, which was the center of education in the world. Many priests, even popes, and his Jewish scholars were trained in that university. It was the Harvard of its time. And so it was a woman who received a big inheritance from her father, and she was an Algerian woman and founded this institution. And I forgot the exact dates, but it's so we could see that sort of linking it to computer science. Algorithm comes from an Arabic scholar.
Yeah, that word. Yeah, algorithm. That's an Arab word.
Algebra comes from an Arabic scholar. So there were many women and men that were brilliant scholars, and I think that is one thing that is often forgotten. They had a very deep philosophical, spiritual tradition as within the Arabic world, and they had brilliant contributions to science, to art, to literature in many ways. I think reducing it the way like stereotyped it is really unfortunate, but it is part of human nature, and it makes it unfortunately easy for creating enemy images for others.
Yeah. And just by you telling me about this university, and I looked it up, for example, in world history class, in none of my classes I've ever taken have I heard about the Idrisi dynasty. I was like, wow, there's like a whole big, like kingdom, a Muslim dynasty that I never knew about. Like that's an example. So for our education system, when we think world history, we got to explore the Arab world more. Like we focus a lot of time on Europe, focusing more on China now, but like the Arab world, Africa, the South America, etc., they don't get as much shine, and that's to the detriment of people's understandings.
Yeah, and Arab world is even today their emphasis on education is big, but sort of before that, even in the African continent, Mali was the center of this biggest empire, and it was the Mali's libraries were very famous. I think they were brought, some of the original books were brought to the Library of Congress in the U.S. because of I forgot they even had a conflict resolution library dating back to 800s or something like that. It was very fascinating. And so it was, but I think the key is to recognize that every society, every civilization, every community that brought something unique and important, we're all part of the same humanity. We all have contributed. So no success, no civilization is the result of one nation, one group of people. So I would, recognize that every society, every culture, every period have many unique contributions to humanity as a whole. So we're not really here to compete in that sense, but to celebrate our differences and to work for creating a better world for all of us. So.
Applying anthropology, archaeology, this is something my friend Pablo, who really inspired me to, continue down an intellectual path, he would always repeat in one of the history classes that I met him in. He's like, whenever two cultures interact, they're always going to influence each other, even if power dynamics are very different or one's dominating the other. It's always a two-way conversation, always a two-way inspiration. So that's something he planted in my brain that, we're emphasizing in this conversation. Like every culture's contributes to every culture as long as they've interacted. And even if they haven't interacted directly, they've probably interacted indirectly. So like, don't ever dismiss any culture.
No, and also like it shows us that diversity, difference is part of strength. Even in genetics, if you're still working on the same pure gene pool, you have more prone to like worse quality genes and more illnesses. But the more cross-fertilization with outside gene pools makes your gene pool much stronger. So I think that's another like this myth of purity is a dangerous thing for human survival in the long run.
A segue to talk about the computer science part of what Professor Ayse has studied was I sat in on her class when I was exploring the MSFS program at Georgetown. And I will never forget this. There was a Palestinian student in Professor Ayse's class, and I had never met a Palestinian. So, and then I had a bunch of friends. They're like, Jerry, how's the session going? How's the classes going? And I was like, there's a Palestinian student in here, and the first question all my friends asked were, "Oh, was she all covered up?" Like, that's the perfect example. It's like we all have to examine our assumptions, and more importantly, let's try to go and actually interact and like get to know people, right? I was like, at first I was like, why do they ask? I'm like, well, that's like, think about the images that people sell. I was like,
Yeah.
that's why they asked that question. So I was telling that story. I'm like, besides the fact that I loved that class I sat in on, when I told people that there was a Palestinian student in the class, the first thing all my American friends were like, "Oh, was she all covered up?" I was like, I see. We still have a ways to go to get people to examine their biases.
Yeah, I had many students who are from Palestine, from Israel, from different parts of the world, and they're all very brilliant and very diverse. I mean, but not to brag, but I think Georgetown has a very sort of wonderful environment to foster this and sort of support everyone from all backgrounds without really choosing favorites. So I really appreciate Georgetown for that purposes.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's start by talking about that course you taught. What got you to kind of put together such a neat course?
So although I was very interested in astrophysics, but since 1990s, I had not taken, actually even before that, because when I went to Australia and came back, I had to make my choices in classes. Like in the university entrance exam, you either choose a math and science path or humanities path. When I was in Australia, I missed a lot of the math and physics classes that were in Turkey. And in Turkey, we had a very rigorous sort of exam. So to get into STEM field was going to be really, really hard. And I did not feel that that was my strength. My math was not my strength. So I never thought of going back again to school in this area. So this was a big sort of a decision for me when I was in my 40s and 50s now, to go back to school and do computer science. But one thing that really led me to it is that everything was happening in around me was transforming. As I said, conflict resolution field is very dynamic. We evolve with the changing nature of conflicts. So one thing that I realized that the world is evolving so fast. If we cannot understand this new technology, we're not going to be able to catch up with what's happening. I mean, we were just starting to understand some of the complex issues in our field. But so that was one thing. And I'm a very curious person. So I became very, very interested. But me and my relationship with computers were also very disastrous. Like anytime I touched a computer, I would create all kinds of like fatal errors, catastrophic errors, any error that is possible, I've created it. So it was very difficult for me to understand. But so I tried to learn online. I went to, like, we have a wonderful program at Georgetown, Massive Data Institute, and a wonderful teacher, Dr. Lisa Singh, who is really working hard to make sure that social sciences also have an access to some of these technological programs. So they would do wonderful programs for anyone who is interested, like free Python classes. So I tried to go, but I couldn't understand a thing. They were saying things that like didn't make sense to me. So even to understand, even to learn, I was starting from minus, not from zero. So I tried some online courses, but I had no one to ask. And I always needed to answer questions, like I needed to ask and learn my own way. So Dr. Lisa Singh sort of said, we at Georgetown has a postbaccalaureate program. You can try to apply. And which was, you do like it's like an undergrad, but only thing you do is focus on your department classes. You don't take the general ed courses since you already have. So it was a very unique thing for me to apply. I think all the faculty was kind of surprised. And since like my math was like, since 1990s, I hadn't seen a math question, and I like math, but I was not good at it. So I never had done anything with it. And one other thing was that I did not realize how much math goes into computer science degrees. That was part of my ignorance too. So I jumped in. Faculty were super nice to me. They tried their best, but my very first class, this is how ignorant I was. I took an intro to computer science class in the summer. I thought I could do it so you condense 14 weeks into 5 weeks, and every week you have to do a big major assignment so that it's equivalent to the semester program. And if you don't know anything you have about that field, you have no idea how hard that's going to be. And once I realized what I got myself into, I was like, oh my God, like poor TAs. I think I asked the most stupid questions ever. Like, what is a class? Class is like a computer science terminology. What is this? What is that? I had no idea. So they were super patient. And of course, my students, so as I started, my own students would complain they had an exam, and I would show them, do you want to see my exam this week that I'm sitting in? This was also before AI, before ChatGPT, everything you had to I had no one around me that had math or computer science degrees. So I was completely alone trying to figure out. There's no ChatGPT. You couldn't ask any question to anyone. I mean, I think I did do a lot of Google's research. I went on to websites like Geeks to Geeks, Skivit, like there are all these computer science geek rooms that I went in. I was super shy, but one thing I found out that although there's like social science they seem to be much more social, outgoing, but when it comes to helping each other, they're much more defensive and protective. Whereas computer sciences, you get this image of them much more quiet, introverted. But the moment you go there, it's a completely different world. Everybody's so out there, so helpful, so you can ask any question, so supportive. Even the creator of programs would answer you directly if you have a question, and they don't care how stupid your question sounds. They're eager. So that was also a very big culture shock for me. I found so much support in those areas that I never would have gotten in other fields, I think. So that was a big thing. But and of course the other thing was I could always quit. But I quit teaching full time because it was more important for me to learn this, because the more I struggled, the more I wanted to learn. It was like, it didn't deter me. And of course, there's a little element of pride, so that I can do this. I'm not going to embarrass myself in front of my colleagues and my students that I quit a program. I just, and it was, so when my students were complaining about their exams, I would show them, oh, this is the questions that I'm practicing for my exam. Would you guys going to help? They never ever complained about assignments again. To me, at least. So after that, once you finish computer science degree, I mean, I think I have one more class, calculus, but I became very interested in experimenting. For fun, I now try to create programs. It does help to have ChatGPT now. I don't have to go to TAs to sort of ask about all the questions that I have in my mind. ChatGPT is or other AI is very patient with me when it comes to computer science questions. But that was really a wonderful experience. I mean, I have to say, it was difficult for students to have me in their class as another student, having to do group projects with a faculty who's old, and I'm thinking about like 19, 20-year-olds. My first class was with 15 and 16-year-olds, and they knew so much more. There was a summer program, so there's all these high schoolers and some undergrads from Georgetown wanted to come and take this course. It was a very different sort of environment than I was used to. So, and it was hard for them too, I guess, to have what do you call a Gen X? I'm not a boomer, thank God, but in their class. But Gen X, we are very resilient. We don't care much about what others think anymore, at least, and we do our own thing. So it
Yeah,
was,
they say Gen X is the resilient generation. Like you're more quiet than the millennials and the boomers, but you're the most resilient. So yeah, Gen X is like the generation that never gets a lot of credit. But yeah,
yeah,
again, you inspired me. And one thing that I wanted to show you is I my my grad school offers math classes just to brush up on. I've been doing it because
oh,
the
great.
more you get better at math, if I'm going to take more econ, if I'm going to take more computer science, I need the math. And I had the same realization. I'm like, a lot of the stuff I learned, even in algebra one, in America, you take what's called algebra one with analysis. The analysis part that the teachers sort of begrudgingly teach, that's actually the part that helps you a lot with computer science. And
Yeah.
so I was relearning what a function was, but like now I'm like, wow, so much of this actually applies to computer science. Like,
Oh,
oh,
functions, definitely. That's like the main thing.
yeah.
Yeah, had to take one class, which was my favorite. It turned to be my favorite class, but it was a very hard class, computer vision. So for computer vision homework, the simplest part was the calculus, and I had not done calculus since 1990. And our high school, as I said, was very advanced. We had studied matrices, we had studied calculus, and the class was so difficult that calculus appeared in my head. I remembered it, and that became but then I had to learn Python overnight. The computer program that I couldn't learn for years, but I had taken C++, Java before that. So Python was not only Python, but I had to learn TK, KT Tinker, the GUIs, how to make it. So it all was one night. I had to absorb all that information. So it's
Wow.
crazy, but it became my favorite class of all time. So
Wow. So you got through this post-bac program, and then I'm sure it inspired your teaching and inspired your research direction, including that course that I sat in on that you taught. Like, how did it get you to kind of change your course and stuff, if you did change your teaching?
So one thing that happens is a lot like in our social science field, where there's a lot of interest in evolving technology, but most people don't have a good understanding of the technology and how the algorithm works. So it's always like a weird responding to a secondhand comments. And I know that many of my students are very sort of worried about the new world that's emerging. So some of them comes from a place of like not knowing what's really happening. I mean, there's a lot of things to worry about. I'm not gonna say it's all wonderful in every way, but even when you're providing a critique, you need to understand what you're really critiquing. You need to have a more meaningful conversation. So a lot of people in social sciences did not have a good understanding of what the computer science field was really about, what algorithms takes. And at the same time, they were always expecting these computer scientists to have the answers to some of the world's biggest ethical, moral dilemmas and find solutions to, like, philosophers have been dealing with, what is discrimination, what is bias, and now we're talking about operationalize that and resolve the issue of bias in your algorithm, which is important. I'm not saying it's you have to do that, but many of these guys who are writing the programs the way computer programs are written, they don't always have this notion. They don't even have the interest of these ethical questions. There are many scientists, computer science, who are interested in philosophy, don't get me wrong, but suddenly they were tasked with some of the biggest ethical and moral responsibilities. And I thought it was kind of unfair. So to improve, coming from a conflict resolution perspective, I wanted to understand the computer science perspective and then find a way to mediate that dialogue between the computer scientist fields, policymakers, and the sort of critiques of those, to actually have a more meaningful, more of course, computer science have no idea what people in conflict resolution and other fields are trying to say, what is their concerns, if you don't experience many of those challenges, even if you experience, doesn't mean that you actually become an expert in that area. So there was a lot of discrepancy. So if we want to address the emerging issues and problems more effectively, I felt that we need to be able to talk both. We need people who can talk both languages, at least to some extent, and also understand these areas. So I'm very happy to say that there are many people with coming with social science and computer science background now. There's more interest in that area, but that's what really drove me in. And I wanted to help my students understand how to think about these questions in more realistic ways. And we're not there just to criticize, we are there to find solutions to the problems. So it's thinking together. It's almost like to create a dialogue.
I love it. I love it. Something that I'll say to support everything you said is that I found out recently that in the computer science field, whether subfields like UI, UX design, human computer interaction, they're not required to take an ethics course, which traditional engineers are required to take an ethics course.
Yeah, actually, the computer science classes that I've taken at Georgetown, Georgetown pays a lot of importance to ethical dimensions. Every course had a component, at least 1 or 2 sessions on the ethics. Wow. Every class. So that was great. That really helped. I mean, I think the leadership in the computer science program paid a lot of attention to that, but also Georgetown University's philosophy is such that, looks at the whole being. So whatever you do, whether it's the medical field, computer science, they do emphasize. So ethics is usually an important component of all a requirement in many fields. I don't think it's necessarily there's an ethics class in the computer science degree that you have to take, maybe at the master's level, but every course that I've taken had an ethical, like at this, and mainstreamed into every aspect of the courses I've taken.
Wow. So, wow, that's you're selling the program really well. That's very impressive. I'm really happy like all your courses had an ethical component. That's amazing. And I think all schools should learn from that. I think that is awesome.
I don't know what other schools do, but definitely in my experience, Georgetown had a computer science program, had a very important, like a sort of a integration of ethics. And I do know that in public policy, and other programs, we have a required ethics course.
Wow.
Ethics and values.
Mm-hmm. Maybe this is going back to the whole, AI discussion, or maybe this is just a more general thing. Obviously, you're an awesome professor. You get students every semester. What advice do you give to them? Not just about AI, but like, how can they succeed as a student? How can they succeed if they want to study international relations? And obviously, you have experience in computer science. So what can they do if they want to succeed in computer science? What is some advice you give to your students?
So I think many students want to have like a guideline of how to get from point A to point B. But I would say that what is important is the fields, everything is changing so rapidly. So you cannot really predict the future. So planning is very good. Thinking strategically and systematically is very good, but keep that curiosity and want to learn, pay attention to what's happening around you, and always it's almost like having your own sense of intuition, and always keeping your passion and your own personal interest rather than trying to fit into the world out there, which is important. I mean, I'm not saying go against the world, but always have that own distinct unique aspect of yourself with you, and keep the curiosity and be flexible. I mean, I think always be ready to change course when you see one area is not sort of evolving as you think it should be evolving. And I think also you sent me a message about Confucianism, learning and fun. I always tell my students that learning, like, enjoy the process of learning. I think that's very important. Make sure that you also have fun in what you do. And and there's that, like, I don't know, maybe it's this TV show that I'm watching, but really having that joy in your life is really important. I really sincerely think that.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And For example, when I sat in on Professor Ayse's class, I could tell you really enjoyed showing us all that stuff. You really enjoyed talking to your students, right? Having that enjoyment and that joy, especially if you can combine that with learning, is so important. And that's why, Professor Ayse and I kept in touch for many reasons. But one of the reasons was I can tell, like, what I'm learning, I could share with her. And she wants to know what I'm learning. She wants to share with me what she's learning too. And this type of dialogue is so important. So if I were to give students any advice, I'd be like, talk to your professors, email your professors. If you're shy, start by emailing your professors. I'm telling you, most professors, especially at the undergrad, post undergrad levels, really enjoy the aspects that they want to teach. So that's what I would say.
I agree. I do really enjoy what I'm teaching. One thing is that if I teach the same course over and over again, I try to change it every semester, but also try to add new courses, because I think as a faculty, you also need to grow with the students, and each student group is different. Their interests are different. The generation is very different. When I start teaching in 2000s, that generation is no longer here. That was the millennials. Now we have Gen Zs and Gen Y, and so it's changing very rapidly. And so it's we faculty have to also change and adopt. And I think I remember I had met sort of a colleague of my father who was a professor from Harvard at the time, and I had asked him, how do you like? He said he loved learning. And if you love learning, you have to stay in academia, because that's an environment that stimulates learning. I think that's also inspired me to stay in academia a little bit.
Yeah, that's something I've been realizing too, because I did the same thing when I was working. Talking about my time at Bytedance, by the way, I tried to take a Python course when I was at Bytedance, and it didn't work out. I just didn't have the energy, and my mind was in a different place. But somehow when I shifted back into academia mode, as in getting a master's, suddenly like my learning brain came back.
Yeah,
And
it
so
is.
there is something to really support what Professor Ayse said. Like, sometimes staying in academia really helps you continue learning in a different way, that like if you worked and tried to learn at the same time, like work a corporate job or something, try to learn at the same, it's all virtually impossible. Not to say it's impossible, it's virtually impossible.
Yeah, isn't there something called like the growth mindset? You have to shift into that growth mindset, that willingness to learn, and that even your unconscious mind needs to be trained to open up to get into new information.
What courses will you teach this fall?
So I am teaching, I started teaching a new course last semester. It's called Social Movements, sort of empowerment. And so it focuses on theoretical, practical skills and case studies of how do you nonviolently create change through resistance and through practices. So we do sort of focus on social movements historically, but also currently. Try to understand how do you even organize thoughtful social movements to create change that you want without, in a more productive way, in more peaceful ways. There's, of course, the digital dimension of it as well. There's so much is happening in nonviolent direct action in the digital world, which I think is fascinating. That's one course that is open to both graduate and undergraduates, high-level undergraduates. The second course is a course on, that is a foundation course. I'm the director also of the Gender, Peace, and Security certificate program. It's a course for understanding the role of gender in international relations. So it's a foundation course. We go over theory, practice, but also different themes, gender and displacement, sexual and gender-based violence. We talk about the role of violent extremism, and gender identities and gender conceptions and roles, how it plays into it. And then and then there's an undergrad version of that I teach for the undergraduate students. That's also Gender, Peace, and Security and International Diplomacy course.
Is it most of the case, like if you're a professor, you have a pretty big teaching load, right? That's common for professors.
So if you're a tenured faculty, you get a little bit lower. Usually non-tenure, I'm a non-tenure. is three each semester. But because I'm doing this gender peace and security certificate, I get 3-2, which means 3 in one semester to another. But I do like teaching, so I'll be doing 2 additional teaching. One is the sort of the correctional, like the Maryland has this prison system education program, and Georgetown University and the Maryland Correctional institutions have a program called Prison and Justice System. So I'll be teaching a course at the one of the institutions in Maryland to on conflict resolution and peace building to incarcerated individuals. And also in the second semester, I'll be teaching, and Georgetown has another program with high schoolers nationally, high school students who do not always have the opportunity to have access to courses. So we offer high school courses, like a college courses for high school students.
All those courses sound amazing. And I think in the future, if and when we do more talks, we could potentially, and again, well, we'd have to go through probably Georgetown, but I would love to like bring a camera, record how you teach the course, maybe student interactions. Again,
Absolutely.
we'll have to work out with Georgetown about this, but like, I just want people to see how education's evolving and how Professor Ayse is at the forefront of it. I really think that's important for people to know, because again, we're in this era where some people I think are dismissing higher education, dismissing education in general, or like the way that it's been done. And I think that's the wrong thing to do also.
Yeah, I think education is always going to be very important. I mean, since ancient times, education has always been an important part of society. Without education, you cannot prepare your young ones to the next. And also without education, your society cannot grow and evolve. Like we all are sort of success today as a civilization, whether technology in other ways, is a result of somebody helped these people to think and create and learn. It didn't just happen on its own. So education is very important, and it's always going to have to be there.
Yeah.
But what do we need to educate about is going to be, important.
Yeah. And I guess the last question for you is how often, or yeah, I guess that is the right way to describe it. How often do you use AI in your day-to-day?
Changes based on day. I like having philosophical conversations with AI sometimes. I'm very, very conscious about the environmental impact of that too, but I've been like thinking sort of like be careful because there are costs, environmental costs and other costs to using AI. But I do enjoy sort of a thinking with AI. I use it more like a research assistant to some extent. You have to be very careful with what tasks you give because it could always make mistakes. And you don't want it to take away your creativity, but you want it to foster your creativity. You could guide that by the kind of questions you ask, as well as by telling the AI how you want response as well. And so it helps simple things. Like I do use it for like a better email writing. That was not something that I was too fond of or was good at. So that's something that I admit. I do, because English is not my first language and I always make mistakes with this and other. So I do use it for looking for editing sometimes, but I do try to be careful, sort of not to give too much work. I do use it for code writing now, and saves time, and debugging is really, really important. It helps me. I really like the way it helps me think architecturally first and then think, but I always go over the code that is developed with the help of AI. But thank God I don't have to submit for grades, so that would have been like a challenge now. But I do sort of check because I do want to learn how it happens. I think as long as you have a willingness and interest in learning, you could make it work for yourself. It's like print media, it's like TV. All technology can be used for good or for bad. I think it's important for us to understand when and how to use it, with the sort of with some wisdom, I would say.
Yeah. One thing that stood out to me is right now, a lot of these companies that are designing these large language models talk about the fact that um, the models need to talk with more philosophers, need to talk with more people involved in ethics. And it's really interesting that you like having philosophical
Oh
conversations with.
yeah,
Yeah, that's awesome.
we have we have very deep conversations, not only about ethics, but we also I like different spiritual traditions. Like we talk about Taoism, Sufism, different religious, and we compare them to quantum physics and this and that. We discuss with AI about ethics of AI, what it should look like, and so, I mean, I actually am keeping a record of all our conversations. Be interesting to see one day, maybe we will write it down, some of these first initial conversation. And it also helps me evolve in my thinking.
Do you have any other books coming up or potential topics for books in the future?
Actually, we're with a colleague of mine. We're working on a book looking at the technology and one peace and security agenda. So one thing that's happening right now is like the not only AI, but the technology is changing the field of peace, security, sovereignty, and all of that. So I work a lot, as I said, on gender issues as well. But one area like that we're trying to evolve human-centered ethics with AI legal mechanisms. But one area that is really under studied or underrepresented is how is this impacting the gendered aspect of it? For example, manospheres and some of this stuff is creating its own unique dynamics, but at the same time, the technology facilitated gender-based violence against women peace builders, women politicians, or women in general is much higher. So that's one example. But also, we have now sort of start thinking about drones, but not only drones, but aerial I forgot. Manless, automated aerial machines that could kill individuals. How is that changing? And also like kind of injuries and how gender comes in, for example, who are more fighters, more men, and who are more killed are more men, who are more injured are more men. So how is that going to impact the workforce, for example, in the future? And what are societal gender expectations of men? How is that going to impact that? But also drones, one of the things that they could do is they can follow individuals. And how is that creating a space for civilians, which happens to be more women and children and elderly? So how is that impacting sense of security, sense of, that's another area. So there's so many questions like that. These are just the like 2 questions out of like maybe 10,000 questions that we have to really reconsider. So there are all these sort of other impacts of technology in ways that we don't understand yet. So Women, Peace and Security Agenda is sort of a international document based on the United Nations Resolution 1325 that focuses on addressing gender issues. It's actually Women, Peace and Security Agenda, but it evolved into gender broadly. Is how do we provide participation, more women's participation in decision making, but in different areas as well. So AI can be sort of excluding certain groups. For example, while we think AI and technology is making information much more accessible, but whose information is being provided and which groups, because not everybody has equal access to internet or technology, or so who's being excluded? How is that? Whose voices are not being represented? So who's not participating? But at the same time, it could increase participation. So we're looking at this double side of it. So participation is one, protection is another one. So protection includes what kind of harms it can cause to all kinds of technology in this changing nature of environment. But then how could also provide protection? Maybe it could be like AI could also provide better analysis of certain information and then come up with strategies to prevent violence. Of course, there's prevention is the second And finally, recovery. How can we ensure post-conflict recovery into address these different gendered dynamics? So that's what I'm working on with a colleague of mine, writing together.
That sounds like a fascinating book. Is there a expected publish date yet?
No, we're working really hard, but we are sort of at GIWIPS, Georgetown Institute for Women, Peace and Security. We have written a small short sort of a document that covers some of the things very briefly. What are some of these areas? That should be coming out hopefully this fall.
Ooh, okay. So it sounds like we'll have much more talks, because as that book comes about, as we have the courses being taught, we'll definitely do more interviews. You know, I know you and I could probably talk for 4 hours, but
Yeah,
I think
true.
we have a good stopping point here.
Okay.
And we will definitely talk more. Again, out of all the professors I've met, like, you've inspired me so much. So I really have to give you a big shout out. And I'm so glad we kept in touch. And I'm so glad you invited me to that event that Friday, right? I was like,
yeah, that was fun too. Yeah.
Yeah, that was very fun. So I'm sure I will see you around. I will see you around Georgetown. And if there's any cool events at Hopkins or any cool events anywhere that I go to, I'll let you know too.
Yeah, same here. I will definitely let you know what's coming up and what's happening.
Yeah. And some of my friends that sort of like to think and work in this intersection of things, when I convince them to come to DC to visit me, I'll definitely set up a time like we can all meet, because they want to meet some of these cool professors I've met too. So I'm thinking my friend Ashvin, who you know, he's like half computer science but half fintech, you know, he's like that type of guy. He definitely would love to meet you. So I'll set up the time, we'll all meet up.
That'd be great. That'd be wonderful.
Yeah, exactly. He also teaches at Wharton, so you know, like a, you know, academia type of, you know,
that'd be
brain
great,
trust too. Everyone, Professor Ayse, and if you have any questions for future talks or whatever, feel free to leave it in the comment section. And yeah, we will definitely bring her back. And next time, I know I'm going to get my camera, I'll probably interview her in person. So
okay, sounds good. Thank you so much, Jared.
yeah, this was so fun. So everyone, make sure to leave a comment, make sure to press a like, make sure now there's a thing on YouTube called Hype. So everyone hype. And guys, if you want to clip a clip, put it on other social media, feel free to do it too. You know, tag people, tag me, tag Georgetown, etc. Give Georgetown credit, because, you know, Georgetown, it's got some of the coolest professors. And, you know, I've interviewed the most Georgetown professors so far. So it says something about Georgetown and their ability to teach the humanities and everything.
That's great. Thank you.